friends, I'm James. You may remember me from such films like Baby Duck Saves a Cat, Baby Duck Saves Another Cat, and my personal favourite, Baby Duck Saves a Cat. Wait, hang on a second, that doesn't make any sense. Only joking, my personal favourite was Baby Duck's Christmas Special, Part 1 and Part 2. But apart from my auntie in Canada, nobody else bothered to watch those ones. The miserable sods. Anyway, I digress. Growing up, I was always a big fan of adventure stories like Treasure Island and the adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. Now, I enjoy writing and I enjoy doing silly voices, so I thought I would write my own original story with my own original character inspired by the books that I read growing up and put it on YouTube as an audiobook. There'll be 6 videos, each one 10 minutes long, making a 1 hour long story. 100% written by me and 100% narrated by me. So no doubt this is going to be incredibly cringeworthy to listen to, but I'm sure that if we just close our eyes and grit our teeth, then we can get through this together, and I'll see you on the other side. So, this is my story, The Cold Rebellion. I hope you enjoy it. Oh wait, there's something really important I need to tell you.
When I first arrived in Canada, it was under the happiest of circumstances, the result of an indiscretion in London involving an Italian diplomat's wife, an overturned dinner plate, and a Bengal tiger on loan from Regent's Park Zoo. I won't go into the details, it's still a matter of litigation. Suffice it to say that the Foreign Office thought it best I be seconded to the colonies, until the dust, lawsuits, and claw marks had settled. Thus it was, in the spring of 1885, I found myself wearing the ridiculous plumed helmet of the Governor-General's bodyguard, a part-time cavalry outfit stationed in Toronto, whose main duties involved escorting dignitaries, looking handsome on horseback, and avoiding frostbite. Perfect for a man of my talents, namely, doing very little whilst looking terribly official. Toronto in those days sprawled along the northern shore of Lake Ontario, as flat as a billiard table for miles inland. The land was a patchwork of cleared farms, tangled cedar swamps, and the odd rocky outcrop left by the glaciers. Nothing dramatic, mind you, just endless horizon broken by church steeples and the smoke of brick kilns. The lake itself was a grey monster to the south, cold and vast enough to swallow ships whole, while to the north the ground rose gently towards the Oak Ridge moraine, a low ridge of hills that looked more like a gentle swell than proper mountains. It was tame country compared to the Hindu Kush or the Afghan plains, but in early spring the cold clung on stubbornly. Snow lay in dirt drifts along the streets, the ground stayed frozen hard underfoot, and any hint of thaw only turned the roads into treacherous sheets of ice and slush rather than proper mud. So, perfect for lounging in the officers' mess and avoiding anything resembling exercise. Canada, I must say, was no hardship. The whiskey was good, the women hearty and grateful, and the uniform flattered my figure. I spent most days strutting around, speaking in Pashto to impress the brigadier's wife, and claiming an old leg wound from Balaclava whenever drills were ordered. The Canadians thought I was some kind of Anglo hero, a walking almanac of empire and moustachery. I saw no reason to correct them. Then, as ever, came the summons. It arrived via military courier, always a bad sign. The note, stamped with the seal of the Governor-General himself, requested my immediate presence in Ottawa. I assumed I was finally being decorated for bravery in avoiding duty. Instead, I found myself face to face with His Excellency Lord Lansdowne, a tall aristocrat with the smile of a bishop and the instincts of a hangman. The carriage lurched up the snowy drive, wheels crunching on gravel, and I cursed the cold for the 15th time that morning. Canada, in April, is supposed to be thawing. Supposed to be. Instead, the landscape looked like God had taken a piss and it had frozen midstream. Trees stood bare as brooms, the Rideau Canal was still a glassy slab of misery, and the sky was the colour of bad mutton. Ottawa itself sat perched on a high bluff where the Ottawa River met the Rideau, two mighty waterways crashing together like old rivals in a pub brawl. To the west stretched the wide ice-choked Ottawa River, flanked by the dark pine forests and the distant blue line of the Gatineau Hills across in Quebec. To the east and south ran the Rideau Canal, that man-made marvel of locks and stone walls snaking through the city like a frozen serpent, still lock solid in April and glittering under the weak sun. The town proper was a jumble of grey stone parliament buildings, wooden clapboard houses, and muddy streets climbing the escarpment. Victorian ambition slapped onto wilderness rock. Snow lay thick everywhere, muffling the clatter of sleighs and the shouts of lumbermen, while the air smelled of pine smoke and river damp. It was colder than a banker's heart, and twice as unforgiving. We pulled up in front of Rideau Hall, the Governor-General's official residence, an imposing slab of Victorian Gothic smugness surrounded by spruce trees, cannonballs, and the sort of flower beds that lie dormant for 11 months of the year. If you've ever seen any of those country houses that nobility used to hide illegitimate children, then you get the idea. A uniformed doorman with the bearing of a Scottish undertaker gave me the once-over and sniffed like I farted the Marseillaise. "Lieutenant Colonel Sir Terry Lionheart," I said, handing over my card. "Here to see His Excellency." He looked as if he'd rather hand me to the executioner, but bowed stiffly and gestured me inside. Through double doors I went, past the gleaming black and white tiled floor, and into a foyer that reeked of linseed oil, empire, and cold diplomacy. The place was exactly what you'd expect from a transplanted bit of Britain. Polished mahogany, dull portraits of earls nobly remembered, and the smell of damp wool. There was a fireplace going, thank God, though the Canadian idea of central heating in those days was to stuff a badger into your overcoat and hope for the best. After being relieved of my hat and gloves, I was led into a long salon filled with Persian rugs and Arctic melancholy. And there he was, Henry Charles Keith Petty Fitzmaurice, 5th Marquis of Lansdowne and Queen Victoria's official man in the northern wilderness. Now, I've met enough Colonel Governors in my time to know the type, half civil servant, half circus ringmaster. Lansdowne was different. Tall, elegant, and annoyingly clever, with neat side whiskers and the twinkle of a man who's never once tripped over his own underpants. You could tell at once he'd be bred for high office, tight waistcoats, and discreet affairs with married countesses. He didn't rise from his writing desk when I entered, but waved a languid hand and said in a voice as smooth as a Savile Row glove, "Aye, Sir Terry. Please, do come and sit down. You look positively frozen. Do you take whiskey or brandy in the morning?" I hesitated. Both, if you please." That earned the ghost of a smile. He rang a bell, and moments later a man in livery brought in a tray with glasses, a decanter, and a silver biscuit tin shaped like a beaver. I held myself to a healthy pour and took a seat by the roaring fire. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here," Lansdowne said, steepling his fingers. "Your Excellency," I said carefully. It did occur to me that the Governor-General of Canada doesn't usually summon militia lieutenant colonels on secondment unless something's gone terribly right or horribly wrong. "Yes, quite." He paused, glanced at a dispatch on the table, and said, "What do you know of the Métis and the Cree?" I blinked. The Métis? Half Indian, half French out west? Fond of buffalo hunts and fiddles, I hear. And the Cree? Savage lot in the prairies. Last I knew, they were bothering the Hudson Bay Company. "Oh, well, they still are," Lansdowne said. "And that's precisely the problem. London is concerned. There's unease in the air." "Unease in the air?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Good Lord, Your Excellency. If the gentlemen in Whitehall are sitting around in their leather armchairs passing wind in unison, no wonder the Empire is in a state." "Yes, quite. You see, this is a delicate year for the Dominion. The buffalo are vanishing, famine's hitting the tribes hard, and now Louis Riel's back from exile, stirring up the Métis with talks of rights and rebellion. The Cree are joining in, Big Bear, Poundmaker, the lot, Ottawa fears it could erupt into open fighting. The Northwest Mounted Police are mobilizing, but their commander out at Battleford, Superintendent Crozier, he's relatively green in independent command. Decent fellow, Irish-born, but he lacks deep experience dealing with natives on this scale. Overconfident, thinks simply a show of redcoats and the Queen's law will settle it. Whitehall wants someone with your reputation. Brave as a lion in India and Afghanistan, even those American scrapes. To go west as an advisor. Your supposed experience with natives would be invaluable. Keep an eye on things. Offer counsel if Crozier gets too bold, and report back discreetly. We can't afford another mutiny like in India, Lionheart. And you want me to... what? Reinforce the border with my moustache? He chuckled. Not quite. You'll be attached to Crozier's command as a British liaison and military advisor. You'll be badged in, red serge uniform, full credentials, the lot. Make sure it doesn't turn into a massacre. Spying, I said flatly. Advising, he corrected. You'll be kitted out and sent to Fort Battleford. Travel papers will be delivered to your quarters this evening. You'll leave for Fort Galley at dawn. And that, dear reader, is how I ended up being volunteered by the British Empire to babysit a naive Irish policeman who thought himself Achilles reborn, riding toward the greatest frontier uprising since the prairies were baptized in blood. I drained my glass, stood slowly, and gave Lansdowne the faintest of bows. Your Excellency, I said, you'll forgive me if I say that I hope you never, ever recommend me for anything ever again. He only smiled. 2 weeks later, I stood on the ramparts of Fort Garry, the cold wind of Manitoba biting at my ears, looking west across the endless white horizon. Below me, the Red River crept sluggishly through half-melted ice. A few soldiers from the Northwest Mounted Police lounged near the gates, red serge jackets bright against the snow. Someone was singing in bad French. Far in the distance, almost imperceptible, a tiny flag fluttered on the horizon, the Canadian Dominion's red ensign, like a modest curtain hung across a frozen wasteland. Behind me, a young corporal was stuffing my travel kit into a sleigh bound for the nearest railhead. Ahead, across the expanse of nothing, lay the Canadian West, land of revolvers, rhetoric, and reckless policemen. I pulled my grey coat tighter, shivered theatrically, and considered running for the woods. But duty, or rather being court-martialed, held me fast. So I mounted the sleigh, adjusted my fur hat, and muttered under my breath, "Into the valley of death rode the one." Now, I've been to the Americas before. Christ, I'd run guns in Mississippi, escorted slaves out of Virginia, and once spent 2 months impersonating a Pinkerton agent in Nebraska. But crossing into the Canadian West in '85 was like entering a country halfway between barbarism and a circus. I arrived in Winnipeg to the sound of brass bands and the smell of horse dung. Canada was pushing westward with its railroad dreams, and every man, woman, and small child was either drunk on progress or armed to the teeth. Usually both. They had flags the size of opera curtains and a patriotic mania that made a London mob look like a church picnic. From there, I was bundled onto a train west, a rickety contraption full of gamblers, Methodist preachers, cattlemen, and one extremely forward schoolmarm who mistook me for a European prince. I let her believe it naturally, and got a free shave and a bottle of peach brandy out of it too. As the miles rolled on, and the prairies unfolded like a white and brown ocean, I began to wonder, truly, how bad this business could be. After all, these Métis and Indians, what were they? Natives with fiddles and spears? I've seen worse in India, and they hadn't eaten me yet. But then, at a way station near the Saskatchewan River, I caught my first whiff of trouble. 'Twas in the form of a tall, gangling Englishman in a loud tweed suit and a deerstalker hat 2 sizes too small. He had the fresh, eager face of a puppy who had just discovered the world was full of tennis balls, and he carried a wicker travel case, a shooting stick, and an expression of perpetual mild surprise. He plonked himself down opposite me without so much as a by your leave, and beamed as if we were old chums at the Drones Club. "I say, old fruit," he exclaimed in a voice that could have shattered crystal at 20 paces. "You're a military Johnny, what? Red coat and all that?" He had obviously noticed my half-open travel case. "Wizard! Simply wizard! Name's Ponsonby Smythe. Reggie to the chaps. Reggie Ponsonby Smythe. Off to the wilds to bag a moose or two, and generally rough it, what? Care for a spot of bubbly? I've got a bottle of the old Venue in the hamper. Nanny insisted. Says the prairies are frightfully dry." I regarded him with the enthusiasm one reserves for an ingrown toenail. "Lionheart," I said. "Advising the mounted police, not bagging moose." "Oh, ripping!" he cried, clapping his hands like a seal. "Advising! That's the stuff! You must know simply oodles about the natives and all that rot. I say, what rotten luck if we missed the whole show. I bought my best +4 specially. Can't have one's trousers going AWOL in the bush, what? Nanny would never forgive me. Crumbs! Imagine explaining that to the tailor." Then there was a moment of brief silence, followed by, "I say, what hell? You're the famous Lionheart, aren't you? Sir Terry Lionheart of the 11th Hussars? Gosh, what ripping luck! I'm a lieutenant, late of the 17th Lancers. Failed the infantry exam, don't you know? Ha! Couldn't tell left from right on parade. But cavalry's the thing. Mother and the governor insisted I come out to Canada with them and the new missus. Ha! Young wife, frightfully pretty. Bit of a pippin, what? They're back in Winnipeg sorting out the luggage. I've been seconded to your chaps, the Northwest Mounted Police, as inspector. 2 pips and all that. Wizard time ahead, eh?" He prattled on in this vein for the next hour, while unpacking a picnic hamper that contained enough cucumber sandwiches, seed cake, and champagne to feed a regiment. "Oh, capital! Simply capital! I've read all about you. Balaclava, the Crimea, India, Afghanistan, the lot. The 11th Hussars charge, the way you rode through those Russian guns. Gosh, what a show! You must tell me everything. I say, do you think Superintendent Crozier's as ripping as they say? Heard he's the devil for discipline. Ha! Can't wait to meet the great man." He was practically vibrating with puppyish awe. At Crozier, at me, at the whole bloody adventure. So I smiled tightly and tried to disappear into the upholstery. "Oh, crumbs! Real redcoat celebrities! Ha! Do you think these chaps still wear those white gloves and ride into battle to fiddle music?" "Well, only if there's a dinner party at the other end," I said. He liked that and insisted we share a bottle of rye. By the time we passed through Capellet, I was more than half drunk and completely terrified. Not of the rebels, you understand, but of Crozier. The way Ponsonby described him, I pictured a lunatic schoolmaster, with a revolver in one hand and a Bible in the other, galloping off into legend with nothing but his ego and a brass band. I've followed my share of manic commanders. Rajit Singh, Lord Cardigan, bloody Elphinstone, but there was something about this Crozier fellow that gave me the chills. A commander who's too fond of his own press is like a drunk with a loaded pistol. He might shoot the enemy, or he might shoot you. More often, it's both. We arrived at Fort Battleford in the Saskatchewan Territory after a journey of 3 weeks, 2 derailments, 1 pistol duel, not mine for once, and a long argument with a man who believed I was the Duke of Edinburgh in disguise. By that point, I was bored, tired, and ready to fake smallpox just to be sent home. The fort itself was more mud than masonry. A few barrack buildings, a post office, and a saloon optimistically called the Empire House. It smelled of horses and boiled coffee, and the moment I stepped off the coach, I was nearly run down by a pair of Mounties chasing a runaway mule.
"And you must be Mr. Lionheart,"
somebody called. I turned and got my first look at him. Leif Newry Fitzroy Crozier. He was dressed like Buffalo Bill's dress rehearsal. Tied red serge tunic, silk scarf, white gloves, and fair curls falling around his face like a damn pre-Raphaelite angel. He had the air of a man who won a poetry contest and decided to conquer a territory as an encore.
"My dear sir,"
he said, grabbing my hand and pumping it like a water pump.
"You're just in time for the wee dance."
"The what?"
"Our little campaign against Rial and his merry men."
He laughed, like this was all a lark, a hunt in the Shires.
They've given us permission at last, so they have. Ottawa can't stand us sitting still.
Before I could reply with something suitably dampening, Crozier turned and bellowed towards a stocky, red-faced figure standing ramrod straight a few paces away.
Sergeant Major Jones! Front and centre if you please, Mr. Jones!
The man marched forward like a human battering ram. Boots slammed the mud, chest out, and a moustache waxed so perfectly it looked like a bayonet. He was a tall man, and built like a Welsh dresser that had come to life. His face was the colour of a boiled lobster, and eyes that looked as though they had seen every sin in the Empire, and disapproved of most of them.
Sha!
He roared, halting so sharply and with such tremendous force that it caused snow to fall off the roof of the nearest building.
Sha! Will you take Sir Terry here to the officers' mess and get him sorted?
Crozier said cheerfully.
Full uniform issue, quick as you like. We'll need him looking the part.
Jones spun on his heel, fixed me with a glare that could have peeled paint, and barked,
Right, sir, follow me if you please. Sharpish, no dawdling, no messing about, no faffing around. Shut up and march. That's the split, sir. Officers' mess, 2 minutes. Move. Can't have you standing around in mufti, sir.
He about turned and stomped off toward a low log building with a veranda and a sign that read Officers' Mess in faded gilt. I followed, feeling very much like a man being herded by a particularly aggressive sheepdog. Jones halted at the doorway, snapped to attention again, and bellowed,
Officers' mess, sir. I'll not be anything being non-commissioned. Your kit's inside, sir. Uniform issued from Ottawa, sir. All pleasant and correct. Any complaint about the fit, and I'll have the tailor flogged over a gun carriage. Your room's just through the passage, sir. Best bed in the fort. Only ever had one flea, sir, and I've had him court-martialed.
With that, he saluted violently enough to risk dislocating his shoulder, spun on his heel, and marched off. Inside, the mess was dim, smelling of tobacco, whiskey, and old leather. My travel case had already been brought in. I opened it, lifted out the carefully folded red serge tunic, yellow striped navy blue trousers, boots, white gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat. The whole lot had been packed in Ottawa with regimental precision. I stripped off my travel-stained civilian clothes, climbed into the uniform, and stepped in front of the small fly-specked mirror on the wall. Well, I must say, it suited me. The scarlet tunic nipped in at the waist, the yellow stripe down the breeches gave a long, lean line, the white gloves were spotless, and the Stetson hat rested at just the right rakish angle. Even the high collar didn't look half bad against my moustache. I turned sideways, admiring the cut, and thought, Jessica would approve. She always did like a man in uniform, though by now, with me away these months, she'd probably worked her way halfway through the male servants at home. Still, one can't have everything. I gave the tunic a final tug, squared my shoulders, and walked back outside into the pale prairie sunlight. Crozier was waiting, still beaming like a schoolboy.
We leave in 5 days. It'll be swift, clean, and glorious.
Reader, when a commander says that, dig yourself a grave and get in. The last man who promised me swift and glorious was Lord Raglan, and that ended with the Light Brigade decorating a Crimea valley like confetti. In the days that followed, I did my damnedest to stay out of everything. I inspected supply wagons, asked inane questions about oats, and pretended to have an intestinal complaint that kept me within 20 feet of a privy. All this was standard procedure, you understand, a tried and tested Lionheart method of survival. Crozier, meanwhile, swanned about the fort on a white horse, writing dispatches full of adjectives and hosting dinner parties with the pomp of a Roman consul. He had his wife with him, a demure little creature named Tabby, who looked at him with the reverence of a nun gazing at a saint, and possibly with the same sex life. At one of his luncheons, I sat next to a young officer named Tom Steele, the superintendent's aide. Grim sort, told me they whip the Métis in a fortnight and be home in time for Dominion Day.
It's a big rebel encampment near Duck Lake,
he muttered.
but they don't stand a chance. Police are fast, and we've got the guns.
Splendid, I said, wondering if any of this would matter when the Métis and the Cree outnumbered them 5-1 and had repeating rifles.
And you, sir?
He asked.
You've seen a lot of action, I hear.
Oh yes, I said modestly. Afghanistan, Crimea, a touch of the Sudan. I try to avoid anything too strenuous these days. He didn't laugh. Colonials rarely do when irony is involved. And so it was, on the eve of our departure, I found myself standing alone on the ramparts of Fort Battleford, such as they were, a timber wall barely waist-high in places, studded with muddy loopholes and the smell of horses. The wind blew chill across the prairie, and above me the red Dominion flag calmly fluttered in the cool evening breeze. The sun was setting over the endless western plain, throwing long shadows across the barracks and storehouses. Out beyond the Battle River, the land rolled on forever, grasslands, badlands, and rebel country, vast and wild, and utterly unimpressed by flags or bugles or the romantic delusions of an Irish policeman. Behind me, I could hear the rattle of tack, the bark of sergeants, the idiotic bray of some fool practicing a battle cry. In the officers' mess, Crozier was probably composing another florid dispatch to Ottawa, describing tomorrow's march as a glorious adventure. The poor idiot. I stood there for a moment longer, pretending I was some noble watchman of empire, Sir Terry Lionheart, VCKCB, standing sentinel on the edge of the world. It was nonsense, of course. My hands were trembling, my saddle-sore thighs ached, and I was calculating whether I could fake a broken leg using only a rock and some theatre talent. But still, for a brief instant, I allowed myself to pose. The flag fluttered above me, the last bugle call sounded, and I thought, this is it. The edge of civilization, the lip of madness. Tomorrow we ride into history, or at least the bloody shambles that history will insist on calling gallant. So I spat over the ramparts, adjusted my cravat, and turned back towards the barracks. If I was going to risk my life for someone else's glory, I might as well do it with my moustache brushed and my lies rehearsed. And then, on the morning of March the 21st, it happened. The bugle blew, the horses were saddled, and I, Terry Lionheart, aged 47, arthritic, hungover, and very nearly sober, was mounted onto a borrowed mare, riding out with the Northwest Mounted Police towards what history will call the Battle of Duck Lake. I did try to protest, of course, claimed illness, British neutrality, even a vision from the Virgin Mary warning me not to go. Crozier simply grinned, slapped my shoulders, and said, "Nonsense, Lionheart! You're going to witness history!" I muttered something impolite in Urdu and tightened my saddle girth. I've seen mounted forces on 3 continents, but none of them ever looked quite like the Northwest Mounted Police riding out of Fort Battleford that morning. They'd have looked comically out of place at Horse Guards Parade, mind you. Too much dust, too much whooping, too many hats like overturned soup bowls, but by God, what a merry procession they made all the same. A detachment strong, with flags fluttering and boots polished like they meant it. They filed out in perfect order 4 abreast, red serge tunics, breeches, yellow stripes, carbines glinting in the early sun. It was the Empire in another accent, proud and foolish and bold as brass. Each troop was a microcosm of the Anglo experiment. Irishmen, Australians, Scots and frontier boys from Ontario and Quebec, some barely old enough to shave. They joked, sang, smoked roll-ups, and cast nervous glances at the loyal indigenous scouts riding ahead, dressed in sashes and leggings, the only ones amongst us who seemed to know what the devil we were walking into. We moved in a column of 4s, Crozier at the head with his headquarters troop, followed by the rest in staggered order. I'd been lumped in with the troop under the command of a sharp-nosed inspector named John Corbett, riding a chestnut mare named Daisy. He had a stiff upper lip that would have earned him a place at Sandhurst, a decent officer for a colonial, and not prone to long conversations, which suited me fine. Behind us, the wagon train rumbled, hundreds of mules hauling ammunition, food, tents, spare kit, and no doubt a case or 2 of the superintendent's cherished scotch. The regimental band had played us out that morning to a rousing rendition of the Maple Leaf Forever, echoing across the plains. Damn if it didn't stir the blood. The troopers sat high in their saddles, carbines slung, pistols holstered and boot heels polished. A few wore bits of Indian trinkery, bone chokers, beads, eagle feathers they bought or bartered or pinched from somewhere. Crozier encouraged it, claimed it made them more fearsome in battle. I've seen real warriors, of course, Afghans, Sikhs, Apache, and I can tell you, feathers do bugger all if the man wearing them hasn't got the sense to stay alive. Still, they looked fine. Too fine, perhaps. Like actors in costume, unaware they were riding off stage to a final curtain no one had told them was coming. I remember thinking it even then, as the column wound its way across the grasslands, sunlight turning every rifle barrel to silver, and the prairie winds snapping our flags like whips. I remember seeing a young trooper, no older than 18, grinning like a fool, tossing a coin with a man next to him, and I thought, my God, they have no idea. None of us do. Except maybe the scouts. They didn't sing, they didn't grin, they watched the horizon like it was whispering to them. And when I looked closely at their faces, I felt the first cold prick of what was to come. But still, we rode on. Crozier rode at the front like a man leading the tournament of roses. Red tunic gleaming, curls bouncing, hat cocked, revolver shining. Bloody fool. But I'll say this. I've never seen a commander look more like he believed it was all going to end in song and medals. And me, Lionheart, brushing dust from my moustache and wondering, not for the last time, what the bloody hell I was doing in this overgrown homicidal country. They looked like gods, and by God, most of them would be ghosts before the week was out. We rode for 2 days across country that looked as if God had started making a prairie and then lost interest. Flat, endless, dotted with the odd frozen stream and the wind cutting through red uniform and grey coats like a knife through butter. The column moved briskly, too briskly for my taste. Crozier had us pushing hard, convinced that speed would catch Rial's men flat-footed. I kept my head down, my carbine slung, and my mouth shut, except for when someone offered rye. The first sign of trouble came on the afternoon of the second day, near a place the scouts called the Patoche Crossing. We were following the Carlton Trail, a rutted scar of mud and wagon tracks that passed for a road. When the lead scout reined in sharp and raised a hand, the column halted in a clatter of bits and curses. Ahead, half hidden in a poplar grove, a single man on horseback watched us. He was dressed like a mountain man gone to seed, buckskins greasy with years of dirt, fur cap pulled low, and a Winchester held tight across his saddle. His scarred face was like a badly carved totem pole with one eye white and milky. A whiskey trader, I reckoned, or worse. A renegade scout who'd sell powder to both sides and laugh while the shooting started. Crozier rode forward, all red tunic and confidence, with 2 troopers flanking him. I edged my mare closer, telling myself I was merely observing. In truth, I wanted a clear line to bolt if things turned ugly. Then Reggie bounced up behind me on his horse, eyes wide. "I say, what, hell? Dodgy-looking customer, hey? Do you think he's one of Riel's lot?" "Shut up, Reggie," I muttered, "and keep your head down." Crozier hailed the stranger.
You there! State your business!
The man spat tobacco juice into the snow and answered in a voice like gravel under boots. "Just passing through, Superintendent. The name's McTavish. I trade a bit, and I hunt a bit too, but I ain't looking for any trouble." "Trouble's already looking for you," Crozier replied. "Rial's raised the flag, so he has. Any man caught running powder to rebels will be hung. Hand over your rifle and come in peace." McTavish grinned, showing brown teeth. "I ain't running powder. I'm just passing through. You've got no call to stop me." The scouts murmured among themselves. One of them, named Pierre, narrowed his eyes and muttered something about a Métis spy. Crozier hesitated. I could see the calculation in his face, arrest the man and waste potential time, or let him go and keep moving. He chose the latter. "Raid on then," he said. "But if I see you again with a rifle in rebel country, you will answer for it." McTavish touched his hat brim with mock courtesy, wheeled his horse, and vanished into the willows. The scouts watched him go, uneasy. Reggie exhaled dramatically. "Oh, crumbs! Rotten luck he got away. I was all set for a spot of excitement. Do you think he'll tell the rebels we're coming?" "He probably is a bloody rebel," I said. "Now shut up and keep your eyes open." We rode on into the evening. The prairie began to rise, gentle at first, then steeper until the horizon broke into low, snow-dusted hills. The air grew colder, sharper. The wind carried the bite of the snow line ahead. By dusk, we reached a sheltered hollow near a frozen riverbed, and Crozier called a halt. Camp was struck quickly. Fires low, watchers posted, horses picketed in a rope corral. The men ate hard salted meat in silence, the laughter of the morning gone. Reggie, of course, was still full of beans. "I say, wizard campsite, do you think we'll see any action tomorrow? Gosh, wouldn't that be ripping? Nanny always said that." I looked at him over my tin mug. "Reggie, why didn't you go and inspect the chaps on Stag?" "Oh yes, quite right. Ha! I'm sure they need me. Good night, Lionheart." We slept, or tried to, under canvas that flapped like laundry. The temperature dropped hard, and frost rimmed the guide ropes by midnight. I lay awake listening to the wind and the occasional snort of a horse, wondering how many of us would still be breathing this time tomorrow. Dawn came grey and bitter. The column formed up again, breath steaming and fingers numb on the reins. The trail climbed steadily now, rolling hills giving way to steeper ridges, patches of pine and aspen thickening into proper forest. Snow lay in drifts across the path, forcing the wagons to double-team the mules whilst the mountains leered overhead. By noon, we crested a low rise and saw it. Duck Lake. A wide, half-frozen sheet of ice and black water with a thick forest and mountain range directly behind it. On the far side, deep within the primeval forest, smoke rose in thick threads from the Métis cabins hidden behind the timberline. Our scouts fanned out, riding low, then returning with grim faces. Pierre reined in beside Crozier.
"They know we're coming, sir. Dug in along the ridge in front of the lake."
Crozier's jaw tightened. He studied the ground ahead, open prairie sloping down towards the Métis ranks. No cover worth a damn.
"We'll advance in lane. Carbines ready. We'll break them this side of the lake. They'll shatter when they see the red coats."
I glanced over at Reggie. For once, the puppyish grin was gone. He was pale, clutching his reins too tight, and even he could smell the trap. The scouts murmured again, one of them pointing to fresh tracks in the snow, moccasin prints, pony tracks circling wide. Now was my time to shine. I galloped up to Crozier in an attempt to advise him on a less suicidal plan of action. "Crozier, there's a good chap. Now, I've been studying the land, and I think the best plan of attack is—" Crozier raised his hand.
"Mr. Jones, good luck to you. Forward!"
The column moved down the slope, slowly, flags snapping, carbines unslung. I felt the familiar cold prickle along my spine and the feeling of my bowels wanting to violently vacate my lower half. Somewhere ahead, on our side of the lake, hidden along the obvious ridge, men were waiting. The silence was the worst part. No war cries, no shots, just the creak of saddles, the crunch of hooves in snow, and the knowledge that we were riding, slowly, straight into it. Crozier rode tall and confident, believing in his own legend. I rode low, heart hammering, knowing better. And somewhere, in the snow ahead of me, I swear I heard the click of a rifle hammer being drawn back. We went down the slope like men walking into a warm shower that they knew was going to turn cold. The ridge ahead was low and long, a spine of frozen earth and dead grass that hid what was ever waiting for us on the other side. The scouts had already vanished into the willows. Now they came back at a gallop, faces tight. Pierre reined in beside Crozier.
They're there, Superintendent. Countless of them. Behind the ridge. Rifles. Waiting.
Crozier's jaw set.
Form a lane! Advance at the trot! Carbines ready!
The column shook itself into a skirmish line, red tunics spreading across the slope, yellow stripes flashing in the pale sun. Reggie was suddenly beside me, no longer the bouncing puppy. His grin had gone, and his face was pale but set. He was an inspector now, 2 pips on his shoulder, and for the first time the boy looked like he might actually mean business.
Troop, dress by the right and carbines at high port. Steady, lads, steady.
His voice cracked once, then steadied.
Eyes front and no talking in the ranks. We're going to give these blighters what for.
I glanced over at him. The puppy had teeth, after all. Then the first shot was fired. It came from the ridge, sharp, flat, like a board snapping. A puff of grey smoke bloomed above the dead grass, and Inspector John Corbett, riding just ahead of me on his chestnut mare Daisy, gave a short, surprised grunt. His head snapped back, blood sprayed in a bright arc from his neck. He swayed once, hands loose on his reins, then toppled sideways out of the saddle like a sack of potatoes. Daisy reared, hooves skidding on the frozen earth, and Corbett hit the ground hard, rolling once before lying still, scarlet spreading under his head. For 1 heartbeat, the line froze. Then the ridge erupted. Rifles cracked in a ragged volley, spitting smoke and lead from behind the crest. Bullets whined overhead, thudding into snow, slapping wetly into horseflesh. A trooper screamed as one took him in the shoulder. Another horse reared, screaming, and crashed down. The mateys had us perfectly sighted. We were advancing downhill in their fire, no cover, redcoats like targets painted onto snow.
Return fire!
Crozier roared, revolver already in his hand.
Give them the Queen's own!
The carbines barked back, sharp, disciplined volleys at first, then ragged as men dropped from their horses and went to ground. I slid off my mare, heart hammering, and dropped behind her, carbine coming up. The mateys were good, damned good. They fired and ducked, never showing more than a head and shoulders, reloading with the speed of men who'd grown up hunting buffalo. Reggie was on foot now too, face white but steady.
Aim low, lads, aim low. Make every shot count.
He sighted down his carbine, squeezed, and a mateys on the ridge jerked backward like a puppet with cut strings.
Oh, I actually got one. Good shooting, troop. Make every shot count.
I fired once, more to look busy than anything, and saw my bullet kick snow off the ridge crest, then ducked as a slug whirred past my ear close enough to feel the heat. The mateys were closing the range fast, some of them already scrambling over the ridge and up towards us, knives out, rifles clubbed. Hand to hand came sudden and ugly. A stocky matey in red sash burst through the smoke straight at me, young, wild-eyed, tomahawk raised. I fired from the hip, the shot took him in the chest and spun him half round. He dropped, gasping, and I stepped over him as another came in from the side. This one had a rifle butt swinging. I ducked, rammed my carbine muzzle into his gut, and pulled the trigger. He folded with a wet cough and went down. Beside me, Reggie was fighting like a man possessed. A matey lunged at him with a knife. Reggie parried with his carbine, then smashed the butt into the man's face. Bone crunched. The attacker dropped. Reggie spun, saw another coming, and fired point blank. The man flew backward.
Push them back, lads,
Reggie shouted, voice hoarse but steady.
Push them back for the Queen.
The mateys pressed hard for a minute, knives flashing, rifle butts swinging, curses in French and Cree. But the red surge line held. We were better trained, better armed at close quarters. One by one, the attackers fell or broke and ran, scrambling back down the ridge or diving into the willows. The firing slackened, then died away to scattered shots. Smoke drifted across the slope, men groaning, horses stamped and snorted. Corbett lay where he'd fallen, mouth agape, eyes open but lifeless. Crozier rode down the line, face grim but triumphant.
Well done, lads! We've bloodied them! They have pulled back!
He reined in beside me, breathing hard.
Lionheart,
What's your expert opinion?
I wiped powder smoke from my moustache. Well, we've won the first round, Superintendent. But they're not beaten. They're just waiting. He nodded, eyes on the ridge. Beyond it lay Duck Lake. Wide, half-frozen, the Métis' cabins on the far side sending up thin smoke. The scouts were already reporting. The main force was across the ice, dug in among the buildings and trees. Crozier studied the ground, open prairie sloping gently down to the lake's edge. No cover, just ice. Thick in places, thin in others, and black water showing through the cracks. He straightened in the saddle.
Mount up,
he said.
We cross the lake, straight across the ice to the village. They'll break when they see us coming.
I stared at him. Superintendent, I said quietly, that ice won't hold a column, and there's no cover. He gave me a bright, confident smile, the smile of a man who still believes in his own dispatches.
Nonsense, Lionheart. The Queen's law is stronger than ice. Forward!
Reggie, reloading beside me, looked pale but determined. Ha! Orders are orders, sir, but we'll see it through. I looked at the lake. Black water gleamed through widened cracks, the wind moaning across the ice like a warning. Crozier raised his hand.
Column! Advance!
And we started down towards the frozen water. The ice looked solid enough from the shore, white and grey, crusted with snow, stretching across the lake like a frozen road to the Métis' village on the far side. But as the column edged onto it, the groans started. Deep, ominous creaks like timber bending under strain. Horses shied, hooves slipped on the slick surface, men muttering curses, carbines at the ready. Crozier led the way, revolver drawn, curls blowing under his hat.
Steady on, lads! Keep formation! They'll run when we charge!
Then the first shots came from the village. Sharp cracks, puffs of smoke from the windows and the barricades. Bullets skipped off the ice, whining like angry bees. A trooper grunted and fell from his saddle, sliding face down on the frozen surface, blood smearing red behind him.
Charge!
Crozier bellowed.
At the double!
The line surged forward, hooves thudding, men yelling, red surge vivid against the white. Reggie was on my right, face set, shouting orders. Keep together, aim for the cabins and give them what for. The Métis' fire thickened, rifles barking from every shadow and every doorway. Horses screamed as lead found them. One went down in a tangle of legs, throwing its rider into the ice. The man scrambled up, only to catch a bullet in the chest, and dropped like a stone. I spurred my mare hard, bent low over her neck, firing blindly towards the smoke. The ice buckled under us. Cracks spidered out with pops like pistol shots, water bubbling up black and cold. A wagon hit a thin patch and plunged through. Mules brayed in panic as the load tipped. Ammunition crates spilled, men shouted, trying to haul it free. Bullets raked them. One mule took a round to the head and went still. We were halfway across the ice when the real hell broke loose. The Métis poured out of the village, dozens, scores, charging onto the ice with war cries that chilled the bone. Tomahawks, knives, rifles, faces painted, sashes flying. Hand to hand, hit like a wave. A Métis warrior leaped at me from the side, knife flashing. I twisted, swung my carbine butt, caught him across the jaw. He went down, but grabbed my foot, pulling. My mare reared, I kicked free, fired down, saw him jerk and lie still. Reggie was in the thick of it, revolver blazing.
Hold the line! Hold!
A Métis tackled him from his horse. They rolled on the ice, punching, grappling. Reggie got an arm free, slammed his pistol into the man's temple. Crack! The attacker went limp. But the ice was failing. Cracks widened to giant gaps. Water surged up. A section gave way under a group of troopers. Screams, splashes, men vanishing into the black depths, arms flailing. Then I saw Jones. The sergeant major was off his horse, standing like a rock amid the chaos, bellowing orders.
Form up, you idle showers! Form up and fight!
5 Métis rushed him, hard men, tomahawks raised, knives out. Jones didn't flinch. He swung his carbine like a club, caught the first across the skull with a crunch that dropped him dead. The second came in low. Jones kneed him in the face, then stamped down on his neck. Snap!
You bloody bastards!
He roared. The third swung a tomahawk. Jones ducked, grabbed the man's arm, twisted it back until it cracked like dry wood. The mateys howled. Jones smashed his fist into the throat, silencing him forever. But the last two were on him now, one from each side. A tomahawk bit into his shoulder, blood spraying. Jones bellowed like a bull, spun, and headbutted the attacker, shattering his nose in a spray of red. The man staggered. Jones seized his tomahawk and buried it into his chest with a wet thud. The fifth matey leaped onto Jones's back, knife plunging into Jones's side. Jones roared, reached back, grabbed the man by his hair, and yanked him over his shoulder like a rag doll. He slammed him onto the ice, crack, and stomped down on his chest, ribs giving way. But the wounds were telling. Blood poured from his shoulder and his side. The first attacker he dropped wasn't dead. He crawled up, tomahawk swinging low, hacking into Jones's leg above the knee. Flesh parted, bone showed white. Jones staggered, but didn't fall. "Ah!" he gasped, swinging wildly. The mateys swarmed him now, knives and tomahawks rising and falling. One blade took his arm at the elbow. He howled as the limb flopped free, blood violently jetting. Another hacked at his thigh, severing muscle and tendon while he still stood, roaring in defiance. A tomahawk split his scalp, exposing skull. He lashed out with his good hand, crushing a windpipe. They pulled him down at last, hacking, chopping, limbs severed in gory sprays, blood pooling black on the ice. Jones thrashed, still fighting, even as they carved him like a joint. Arm gone, leg hacked free, alive through it all, cursing to the end.
"You bastards!"
Then, silence from him. The mateys stood back, breathing hard, covered in his blood. The sight broke something in the line. Men turned, horses slipped, the charge faltered. Crozier shouted, "Hold! Hold the lane!" But the ice was done. A massive crack ripped open under the melee. Water erupted like a geyser. Horses plunged in. Men screamed, vanishing into the current. I spurred my mare back toward the near shore, firing over my shoulder, mateys closing. A bullet grazed my arm. Pain burned. The ice buckled under us. Crack. The world tilted. My mare screamed as we went through, cold like knives, water closing over. The current grabbed me, swept me under downriver, away from the slaughter, into the unknown. The current dragged me under like a cold fist closing around my chest. Water roared in my ears, black and merciless, filling my mouth, my nose, and my lungs. I kicked wildly, clawing for the surface, but the current was stronger, tumbling me over and over, ice chunks battering my ribs, my scarlet tunic dragging like a lead weight. Somewhere in the chaos, my mare gave one last terrified scream, then went silent beneath the black. I broke the surface once, gasping, lungs burning. The battle sounds were already distant, muffled pops of carbines, faint shouts, the thin scream of a dying horse, fading fast as the river swept me downstream. The ice had cracked wide behind me. The red tunics and yellow stripes were shrinking specks against the white, swallowed by smoke and distance. Then the current pulled me under again. How long I was carried, I couldn't say. Minutes? An hour? Time dissolved in the cold and dark and the endless roar. My arms ached, my legs were lead. The river narrowed, banks rising steeper, trees crowding closer. Pine and spruce leaning out like silent witnesses. The water grew faster, colder, flecked with foam and broken ice. I was half drowned, half frozen, clinging to the last shred of will that kept me from simply letting go. Then the current slackened. The river widened into a shallow bend, gravel bar pushing out from the bank. I caught myself up in a tangle of driftwood with a jolt that knocked the last air from my lungs. I clawed at the branches, dragged myself half out of the water, and collapsed face down on the wet stones and snow. For a long minute, I just lay there. Coughing river, shivering so hard my teeth rattled. The battle was gone, nothing left but the wind in the pines and the soft gurgle of the current. I was alone, far from the lake, far from Crozier and Reggie and the thin red line. The mountains had closed in around me, dark timbered slopes rising sharp on both sides, snow thick on the branches, air thin and bitter with altitude. My mare lay a few yards upstream, washed up on the same gravel bar. She'd cracked against a boulder, neck twisted at a wrong angle, eyes open and glassy. One leg was snapped clean, bone jutting white through the torn hide, and blood had frozen in a dark fan around her head. The poor beast. She'd carried me faithfully until the ice betrayed us both. I pushed myself up on shaking arms, teeth chattering, uniform sodden and heavy. The cold was inside me now, gnawing at the marrow. I needed fire, shelter, dry clothes, anything to stop the shivering before it killed me. Then I heard it. A low, rumbling grunt, deep, wet, from somewhere in the trees above the bank. I froze. Another grunt. Closer. Heavy footfalls, crunching through snow, branches snapping. I turned slowly. She stood 30 yards up the slope, a female grizzly, massive, humped-shouldered, fur-matted with river ice and pine needles. Her head swung low, nostrils flaring, small eyes fixed on me. Behind her, 2 cubs peered out from the underbrush, curious and unafraid. She huffed again, a sound like distant thunder, and took one deliberate step forward. "Oh, bugger," I said. The large brown bear charged. There is no defining way to describe what followed. I ran. I ran like a man who had suddenly remembered he left the gas on in Calcutta. Branches whipped my face, snow exploded under my boots, my soaked red serge tunic clung to me like a second frozen skin. Behind me came the thunder of her paws and the huffing roar that seemed to shake the trees themselves. I dodged left, right, scrambled up a rocky slope, slipped, fell, scrambled up again. My lungs burned, my legs were turning to jelly. But terror is a wonderful spur. The bear was gaining. I could hear her breath, and I could smell the hot, fishy reek of her. Then the ground dropped away sharply. I skidded down a steep bank and found myself in a narrow gully with sheer rocks on both sides. A dead end. I spun round just as the grizzly appeared at the top, silhouetted against the grey sky and deep forest, like some nightmare from a child's fever dream. She reared up on her hind legs, towered 8 feet tall, jaws open, saliva stringing from yellow fangs. This was it. After surviving Balaclava, Afghanistan, half the brothels of Asia, and God knows how many cuckolded husbands, I was going to be eaten by a bear in the middle of nowhere because a half-mad Irish policeman wanted to cross some ice. How perfectly Lionheartian. She dropped to all fours and started down the gully towards me. Slow and deliberate now, savouring the moment. I backed against the rock, hands scrabbling for a stone, a branch, anything. Then, crack! A gunshot rang out, shockingly loud in the narrow space. The bear froze, head snapping towards the sound. Crack! A second shot. This one kicked up snow inches from her paw. With a furious, frustrated roar, she wheeled round and lumbered back up the slope, vanishing into the trees with her cubs trailing behind. I stood there panting, heart trying to hammer its way through my chest. From the rim of the gully, a figure appeared, long rifle still smoking in his hands. It was McTavish, the same scarred whiskey trader Crozier had warned off days earlier. He looked down at me with a crooked tobacco-stained grin. "Hello, mate. Will," he drawled, in that thick London cockney that sounded completely wrong out here in this wilderness. "If it ain't that fancy red coat, looks like you've had a bit of trouble, mate." He scrambled down, surprisingly agile for a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts. "Come on then, mate," he said, offering a filthy hand. "I can't leave you out here for the bears. I've got a cabin not far. A cup of tea'll sort you right out, mate. The drink that cheers, eh?" I was too cold and exhausted to argue. I let him help me up the slope, and we set off through the thickening forest, snow crunching underfoot. The trees closed in, dark and silent, and the mountains loomed like prison walls. On the way, he chatted easily, as if we were all pals strolling down the strand. "I live up here with my mum, I do.
A nice little place, very quiet, just the three of us now.
3. I filed that away without comment. The cabin was small, rough-hewn, smoke curling from a stone chimney. McTavish pushed the door open with his boot.
Here we go, mate. In you go. Sit yourself down by the fire. I'll put the kettle on.
Inside, it was surprisingly warm, a big stone hearth roaring with logs. We both sat down opposite each other in front of the glowing fire. The flames crackled loud in the little cabin, throwing red light across the rough wooden table. McTavish pushed a tin mug of strong sweet tea towards me, then settled back in his chair with a sigh like a man who has waited years for company.
Here you go, mate,
he said, cockney thick as fog on the Thames.
Here you go. Get your laughing gear round that. Nothing like a decent cup of tea after a swim in the river. Cheers, Sir Terry.
I took the mug. My hands were still shaking from the cold. The tea burned going down, but it was good. McTavish lit a roll-up, leaned forward, elbows on the table, and studied me with those bright, unblinking eyes.
So,
he said, smoke curling around his scarred face.
Lionheart, the famous Lionheart, 11th Hussars, balaclava, all that. I read about you in the papers back in the day. Proper hero yous was. Tell me, mate, what's a gent like you doing out here in the middle of bloody nowhere with a bunch of redcoats chasing half-breeds?
I gave him the short version. Ottawa, Lansdowne, Crozier, the ice, the bear. He nodded slowly, sucking on his cigarette.
Yeah, sounds about right. That Irish fella always was a bit keen, weren't he? Still, you're here now, safe and sound and warm. Yeah, don't worry, mate, me and Mum will look after you. Won't we, Mum?
He glanced at the closed bedroom door and smiled, soft and fond. I sipped the tea and said nothing. After a moment, he leaned back again, stretching his legs towards the fire.
You know, I was in the army once myself. As a cockney with a jock surname, wouldn't you believe it? They stuck me in with the Liverpool Irish, volunteer battalion. But you know, they sent a few of us out when the real scrap kicked off back in 1879, Zulu War. You remember that one, don't you? Big news back home. Isandlwana, Rorke's Drift. All them bloody redcoats getting chopped up by blackfellas with spears.
He chuckled, low and rasping.
I was at Isandlwana, mate. Not the main fight. I was with a supply column that got cut off. 2 days we was stuck on a little kopie. No water, no food. Just us and the Zulus. Circling like dogs they were. 23 of us at the start. By the end, well, let's just say we made do, mate.
He took a long drag, eyes on the fire.
Funny thing, hunger. Makes a man think. You start looking at your mates different like, you know. You start wondering which bits of them taste the best. Shoulder or thigh. Funny what the mind does when it's starving.
He laughed again, as if he told a mildly amusing anecdote about a bad pint.
Anyway, we got out. Few of us, you know, come back to England. Tried the straight life for a bit, but it didn't take. Too noisy, you know. Too many people asking questions. So I come out here. Built this little place myself. Quiet, peaceful, you know. Just me and Mum. And the other 2 lads, of course. They used to live here.
I kept my face blank. The other 2 lads? Well, that's 4. I thought you said 3. McTavish waved a hand, casual.
Oh, you know, old mates from the regiment, fur traders now, you know, good blokes. You know, they helped me build the cabins, stayed a couple of winters, then, well, you know, things happen in the mountains, don't they? You know, long winters, not enough food sometimes, you make do.
He smiled at me over the rim of his mug.
You ever been proper hungry, Sir Terry? I mean really hungry. The kind where you start hearing voices and the walls start looking like Sunday dinner.
The fire popped. A log shifted. I took another sip of tea. It suddenly tasted wrong.
Anyway,
he went on cheerfully.
Mum's in the bedroom. She don't come out much these days. Bit poorly, you know. But she likes meeting you gentlemen, always has. She'll want a proper look at you later. proper lady, my mum. Oh, very particular about our guests. He leaned forward again, eyes bright in the firelight. You know what I like about you, Lionheart? You're a survivor, like me. Oh yeah, I can tell. Blokes like us, well, we don't die easy. We always find a way, even if it means eating what's in front of us. He laughed softly, tapping ash into the fire. More tea, mate. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines, and inside, the fire crackled and the bedroom door stayed shut. He refilled my mug, then his own, and then settled back. For a while, we sat in silence, the only sound the crackling of the logs. Then McTavish spoke again, voice lower, rougher, the Cockney drawl taking on a dangerous, almost dreamy edge. You know what the Zulus taught me, Lionheart? Respect. Real respect. When a man's looking at you like you're meat, you learn quick. You learn what you're willing to do to stay breathing. And once you've crossed that line, well, there ain't no coming back, is there? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Some nights up here, when the wind's howling and the snow's coming down, you start talking to yourself, or to the ones you didn't make it, You start wondering if they tasted better than the last rabbit you caught. Funny, innit? The firelight flickered across his scarred face. He looked almost peaceful. Then he leaned in closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Between you and me, mate, sometimes the best cut ain't the ones you expect. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones who think they're clever, the ones who think they're safe. He held my gaze for a long second, then suddenly laughed, a short barking sound. Only joking, Lionheart, only joking. Oh, you should see your face. He stood up, stretching. Anyway, I got to use the outhouse, mate. Back in a tick. Now, don't go wandering off now. Mum don't like it when guests leave early. The door creaked shut behind him. The moment he was gone, I was on my feet. I crossed to the bedroom door, heart hammering, and eased it open. The smell hit me first. Sweet, heavy, and sickly. Oh my God. On the bed lay a suit made of skin. It had been carefully stitched together from human hide, 2 different tones of flesh, roughly tanned, and seams still raw. A curly wig sat on top of the empty head flap. Someone had dressed it in a faded dress, the kind a settler woman might have worn 20 years ago. Lipstick, bright, garish, had been smeared across where the mouth should be. The mother stared back at me with those empty eye holes. I stood there, and the penny dropped like the sound of a coffin lid closing. Well, at least I now know where the other 2 men went, I said. Behind me, the door creaked. I turned too late, and something heavy cracked me across the back of my skull. The world went black. And for the first time since the river, I realized I might have been safer with the bear. I woke up, tied to a chair, in front of the roaring fire. My head throbbed like a drum, the ropes bit into my wrists and ankles, tight as tourniquets. The heat from the flames washed over me in waves, but it wasn't the warmth I felt. It was the sick, crawling realization that I was wearing nothing but my underpants. The scarlet tunic, the breeches, the boots, all gone. Just thin cotton and bare skin. I tried to move. The chair creaked. The knots held. From somewhere behind me came a voice. A woman's voice, raspy, high-pitched, cockney, but wrong. Like a man trying to force his throat into a shape it was never meant to make.
Oh,
You're awake, are you, dearie? The bedroom door creaked open. Out stepped McTavish. He was wearing the skin suit. The stitched human hide hung loose in places, the seams still raw and dark. The curly wig sat crooked on his hooded head. Fresh lipstick had been smeared across the mouth slit, bright, garish and red. Over it all he wore the faded dress, the hem brushing the floorboards. In his right hand he held a large butcher's knife, the blade catching the firelight like a smile. She tilted her head and smiled with that painted mouth. "There we are," the strangled woman's voice said. "Mum's here now. Mum's going to look after you proper." I stared, stomach turning over. McTavish took a slow step closer, the dress rustling, the knife dangling loosely at his side. "You see, love," the voice continued, sweet and reasonable and utterly mad. "My boy's hungry, always has been. Long winters up here, not enough rabbits, not enough fish. And Mum's got to provide, ain't she? So I do all the work, I always do. I kill him, I skin him, I dress him nice. Then my boy gets to eat. That's only right, innit? I'm just a mother, feeding my children." He took another step. The firelight, dancing across the patchwork of dead men's skin, stretched over his chest. I swallowed hard and tried to keep my voice steady. "Look, Mum, you don't want to do this. I'm not good eating. Really, I've been in the river. I'm probably full of fish and Canadian mud. Terrible for digestion." The painted mouth smiled wider. "Oh, don't you worry about that, dearie. We've had worse. Much worse. The last two gentlemen were ever so stringy, but my boy didn't complain, not once. He ate every scrap." I felt the ropes cutting into my wrists as I strained against them. "Please," I said, my voice cracking like a schoolboy's. "You don't want to eat me. I'm a bedwetter. Always have been since I was a nipper. Terrible habit. You wouldn't want that in your stew. It's off-putting. The other lads at school used to call me Piss Pants Lionheart. Not very appetizing, is it?" The thing that used to be McTavish gave a soft, delighted little laugh. High and girlish and completely wrong coming from that broad, scarred face. "Bless you, love. You're ever so polite. Most of them scream and beg and carry on, but you're a proper gentleman, ain't you? That's why Mum's gonna do this nice and slow, so my boy can enjoy every bite." He raised the butcher's knife. The blade gleamed. I tried one last time, voice cracking into a stutter. But wait, please. You don't understand. I'm not even tasty. I've got bad kidneys, and I snore terribly. You wouldn't want that in your pot. Please." The painted mouth opened into a wide, loving smile. "Hush now, dearie," the raspy woman's voice crooned. "Mum's here. Mum's going to make it all better." The butcher's knife rose, gleaming in the firelight, aimed straight at my chest. I kicked out hard with both feet. My heel caught Mum square in the sternum. McTavish staggered backwards with a surprising grunt, arms windmilling. The matted dress flared like a grotesque picnic blanket, and he tripped over the edge of the hearthrug and toppled straight into the roaring fire. For one frozen second, nothing happened. Then the ears of dirty grease and the tanned human hide caught. Woof! McTavish erupted into flames. A screaming, thrashing human torch. The wig melted, the lipstick ran like blood, the stitched skin suit blackened and bubbled. He howled in that awful woman's voice, high and terrible, beating at the flames with burned hands. "Save me, son! Save me!
"You've killed my mum!"
I rocked the chair violently until it toppled sideways. The ropes were old and dry, and one snapped. I wriggled free and bolted for the door. Behind me, the cabin filled with the stench of burning flesh and the sound of McTavish screaming.
"You murdered my mum! You bastard! I'll kill ya!"
I burst out into the frozen sunlight, practically naked, snow biting at my bare skin. McTavish came after me. still on fire, flames flicking up the dress, the skin suit peeling away in burning strips. He looked like a demon fresh from hell.
You killed my mum!
He roared, voice cracking.
She was all I had! Come back here, you coward!
Get away from me, you weirdo! I shouted over my shoulder, sprinting into the trees. He was faster than he had any right to be. The fire was dying on him, but the madness kept him moving. He caught up just as I reached a small rocky outcrop. I spun round and he had a rifle. The same long gun he used to scare away the bear. He levelled it at my chest, breathing hard, face blackened and blistered, one eye swollen shut.
You were supposed to be brave!
He hissed, voice raw.
The papers said you was an hero! Balaclava, Afghanistan, all them stories. And look at you, standing there in your underpants like a dog.
I raised my hands, trying to keep my voice steady. Look, McTavish, mate, I'm not brave. I never was. I'm a coward. Always have been. I ran at Balaclava. I ran in India. I spent my whole life running. Please, just let me go. He stared at me, genuinely shocked, the rifle trembling in his burned hands.
You admit it? Just like that?
Yes, I'm a coward, I'm a bounder, a cad, and an absolute shower. Now, for God's sake, lower the bloody rifle. For a moment, he looked almost disappointed, slumped his shoulders, and started to lower his weapon. Then, all of a sudden, a massive shape exploded out of the darkness behind him. The grizzly, the same mother bear from earlier, hit him like a locomotive. The impact drove him backward over the edge of the small cliff. They went down together in a roaring, snarling tangle of fur and flesh. I scrambled to the edge and looked down. The bear was on top of him at the bottom of the rocks, tearing into him with savage efficiency. McTavish screamed, high and bubbling.
Shoot it!
He howled up at me.
Shoot the bear! For God's sake, shoot it!
I picked up the rifle.
Shoot me!
He begged, voice breaking.
Just shoot me, please! Finish it!
I looked down at the writhing, bloody mess that had once been McTavish. Then I lowered the rifle. No, I said calmly. I stood there for a few moments watching. I gave him one last, cruel little smile. Besides, she's just a mother, feeding her children. I turned and walked away into the snow, leaving his screams behind me, raw, wet, and getting fainter with every step. The last thing I heard as the forest swallowed me was the bear's satisfying grunt and the wet, tearing sounds of a hungry mother providing for her cubs. Some days later, how many I never bothered to count, a retreating patrol of the Northwest Mounted Police found me stumbling half-naked through the snow like a pathetically looking ghost. They had survived the slaughter at Duck Lake by the skin of their teeth, and their faces still carried the stunned look of men who had marched out expecting glory and returned with nothing but empty saddles and bad news. They wrapped me up in a blanket, poured hot rum down my throat, and carried me back to Fort Battleford on a mule wagon. From there, it was a long, cold journey east to Ottawa. Lord Lansdowne received me in the same elegant salon where this whole farce had begun. He listened to my carefully edited account with a polite half-smile of a man who had already decided what the official story would be. The Battle of Duck Lake had been a disaster. Many men dead, the Métis emboldened, and Rial's rebellion suddenly very real. But the Empire required a silver lining, and so, in due course, I was awarded the Northwest Canada Medal, struck for the service in the suppression of the rebellion. A small, rather plain affair with a clasp for Saskatchewan, but it looked very fine on my scarlet tunic when I stood at attention and accepted it with suitable modest heroism. I made no mention of burning mad men, human skin suits, or mothers who were not mothers. Some truths are better left in the mountains. As for Reggie Ponsonby Smythe, I heard later that the bouncing puppy had actually conducted himself rather well in the fighting before being lightly wounded. He wrote me a cheerful letter explaining the whole exciting affair. I burned the letter. And with that, dear reader, I returned to Toronto to whiskey, to women who were grateful, and to the firm conviction that the next time the Governor-General summoned me, I would develop a sudden and convincing case of leprosy. Some men are born for glory. I was born to survive it. And survive it I did, again.
Well, that got a bit scary by the end there, didn't it? Hello again, friends. It's me, James. Now, I promised you that I'd see you on the other side, and here I am. Now, I hope you enjoyed my story and my amazing acting skills, and there's nothing left now than simply to say thank you for watching or listening, and I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.